Bienvenidos a este segundo día
The second day of this in this course.
Investigación de la biomasa y la sostenibilidad.
For those of you that are here with us for the first time, and those of us who are here through the broadcasting, Abisure is an international network that is composed of scientific organizations and professionals from the public and private sector. It is led by the Public University of Colombia. Currently, the work lines are the biomass transformation, mathematic modeling, optimization of physicochemical processes, obtaining high added value products, and the sustainability focused on the life cycle and circular economy. On this first meeting, on the first international meeting, we will be discussing the scientific challenges. And this space, we have researchers from the most important universities. We will be talking about the sustainability of the processes, the production of biofuel and fertilizers. Today, we will be addressing the challenges that mankind is facing. For the second day, I would like to invite Dr. Veronica Voltero. She is the Dean of the Faculty of Mining. She is a civil engineer from EAFIT University. She has a master's degree in science and geological cartography from Holland, and she is a doctor in science from the University of Holland. Currently, she is the Dean of the Mining Faculty of University of Colombia and an Associate Professor of Science and the Environment. Welcome, Dean. Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome all the national and international colleagues that are here today in the first meeting for this meeting, Abisure. I would like to thank Dr. Pretende for boosting the creation of research networks such as this one. I also want to thank the direct application of this kind of research. And I also want to thank the highest academic training. We've been working with the industry. All the developments are great. He has a lot of stuff in the backyard. But the people that they have trained, and many of them are here today, I would like to apologize as well. Can I slow down? I don't know if the poor translator is suffering because I'm speaking way too fast.
Bueno, I would also like to offer my apologies because I couldn't accompany you yesterday in your session. I was in Bogotá en el Consejo Superior Universitario, and however, I had the chance to connect briefly to some of the talks that you had yesterday. I saw some of the presentations, and I had the chance to see the ideas and initiatives that you were presenting yesterday. So I was really compelled to come today and at least say hi to you all. This year, the School of Mines of the National University of Colombia turned 135 years old. Our founders were visionaries that understood the need to form human capital, to use the resources that we had around, and to build the infrastructure needed for the economic development and social development of our society. Each decade of our history brought different challenges to our community. Esto de traducir simultáneamente lo que ya escribí en español es bastante complicado, y ahora sí hablo despacio. Bueno. So we had different challenges in each of the decades of our history. At the end of the 19th century, it was the wars, the civil wars in Colombia, and the political differences that defined our first and difficult years. We were part of Universidad de Antioquia, went back to being an independent school, but we had very few students. It was a complicated time. At the beginning of the past century, it was the political and economical conditions that guided this first alumni that we had in their development proposals, such as the Antioquia Railway, for example, that we no longer have, and El Túnel de la Quiebra, and the Quiebra Tunnel. That was a big endeavor for our society. In the 40s, it was the loss of our independence as a school of mines to become part of the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and the entrance of women to our classrooms. We had the first female engineer graduated in Colombia in civil engineering and mines in 1946. In the following years, there were very few women, only like 6 more women from 1946 till 1960-something. So there were very few. They didn't even have bathrooms in our school. Between the 50s and the 70s, multiple engineering programs were created. We had a very visionary dean that went to the States. He went to Purdue. His name was Peter Santamaria. He went to Purdue and brought all the syllabus for chemical engineering, electrical engineering, control engineering, mechanical engineering, and all these programs that we needed to develop our industry in Medellin and in the region. Sorry. The next decades were the consolidation of our school as a space of research and the formation of human capital to withstand the different challenges that we have as a country. Thanks to our resilience and capacity, adaptive capacity, in the past years, we have understood that the challenges and problems are not circumscribed to our region or our country. Our problems transcend our frontiers and compel us to think about what we do as engineers. In the year 2021, with the support of some of my colleagues who are professors at the university, we wrote what we called El Manifesto de Ingeniería para la Vida, a manifesto for engineering for life. This manifesto is a bunch of ideas that provide us some insight about the importance of situating ourselves in a complex reality. It asks us to get rid of this mechanicist idea of how we understand the world. It asks us to recognize and understand our climate crisis. And it asks us as engineers to, ¿cómo se dice plantear? To formulate, yes, solutions, to formulate solutions with the communities that live in the territories. We have to talk to them, we have to understand what they think and include them in the plans that we as engineers think that are the best for them. So we have to work with these communities that live in the territories, considering sensible aspects such as, I don't know how to say this in English, la ética del cuidado y la justicia intergeneracional. Like care, ethics of care and intergenerational justice. We have to think about those two things. We have to care about each and every one of us, as individuals, as a community, as a country, as a world, as a planet. But we also have to think about intergenerational justice and our responsibility with the following generations. This manifesto gives us a lot of responsibility because it compromises the way we work, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. These kind of networks not only calls upon colleagues from institutions and public and private universities in Colombia, but also invites colleagues from France, Italy, Canada, Chile, Iran, Spain, Germany, Argentina, the United States, Mexico, Australia, and other countries that are connected with us today. This international cooperation network is willing to articulate research about the obtention of products with added value from biomass as an agricultural residue to achieve a meaningful connection between the productive sector and academia. So we can really use this biomass from all these tons of, like 70 tons or something of biomass per year. Thanks to the disposition and initiative that you have, we could all put to the service of society our capacities in mathematical modeling of physical-chemical processes, the development of new biomaterials, the optimization of different processes, the design of equipment that will use the thermochemical use of this biomass, and the sustainability for development that is not only friendly with the environment, but also puts the environment at the center, thinking about the communities using these technologies. These 3 days of the meeting are the starting point of the first phase of this network that will define the governance of the net, and will organize an international congress where we can start building a community to have exchange of students, of professors. The first scientific papers will be written, and most of all, different proposals of research will be written for international calls. Our school bets and compromises with the initiatives, it commits with initiatives of great, of a major order. Yesterday, our vice rector talked to you about Energética 2030, for example, our One Health laboratory, and we think Abisure, or Abisure, or I don't know how to pronounce that name in English, really makes us proud that we have so many allies to advance in the scientific development and in the construction of societies that respond to different sustainable development goals, like Sustainable Development Goal number 7, in terms of clean energy and availability, the Sustainable Development Goal number 8, decent work and economical development, Sustainable Development Goal number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, number 11, cities and sustainable communities, and number 12, responsible consumption and production. So it's not only one goal, it's several that we can really tackle with this network. I want to welcome you all to Medellin, to the centenary-old School of Mines, and I would, where we openly decide that we make engineering for life, and we form engineers to transform the future. Thank you very much, and sorry for my English.
Ahí en edición le bajamos ese 2K a la velocidad, le ponemos subtítulos. Muchas gracias a la traductora ahí por apoyarnos. Muchas gracias, decana, por acompañarnos y por el esfuerzo de traducir el discurso que había traído en español a inglés simultáneo. Le damos la bienvenida ahora a Yesid Ojeda. Él es asesor de la Dirección de Conocimiento del Ministerio de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación de MinCiencia, ahora MinCiencias, antes Colciencia, quien compartirá con nosotros una reflexión sobre el futuro del aprovechamiento de la biomasa en Colombia. Yesid es ingeniero químico de la Universidad Nacional de Bogotá, magíster en Administración de la Universidad de los Andes y especialista en estudios universitarios sociales de la Ciencia e Innovación Tecnológica de la Universidad de Oviedo. Ha trabajado por 26 años en Colciencias, lo que hoy es MinCiencias, principalmente coordinando el Programa Nacional de Ciencia, Tecnología e Innovación en Energía y Minería, hoy foco de energías sostenibles, en la formulación e implementación de políticas, producción de conocimiento y consolidación de capacidades para ciencia, tecnología e innovación en el marco de las políticas y planes sectoriales afines. Yesid, bienvenido.
Muy buenos días a todos. Inicialmente agradecer la amable invitación de Farid a compartir este espacio, hacer extensivo el saludo a las directivas de la Universidad Nacional, a la doctora Veronica Voltero, decana. Nos encontramos hace algunos años en algunas reuniones, y hacerle extensivo el saludo al vicerrector, al doctor Juan Camilo Restrepo, y al vicerrector de Investigaciones. Digamos, la reflexión de hoy, y digamos, siendo ustedes un público tan selecto en tema de investigación, está mirado desde el punto de vista de la política. Entonces, que es el rol que nos corresponde mover como ministerio. El Sistema Nacional de Ciencia y Tecnología es bastante rico en sus componentes. Entonces, la primera reflexión, y es obligatorio, digamos, que nos marca la hoja de ruta. Misión de Sabios, acá nos acompaña la doctora María de Pilar Noriega, que formó parte del foco de tecnologías convergentes Industrias 4.0. Digamos, esta foto fue tomada a finales 2019, no me acuerdo, doctora María del Pilar, si fue noviembre o diciembre. Diciembre 5. Entonces, digamos, de esa jornada, tal vez lo que quisiera rescatar es, digamos, extractos que hizo el doctor Clemente Forero, que fue el coordinador de todos los focos, cuando hizo entrega de los resultados de la misión. Y básicamente es como un sueño, ¿no? El sueño que él mencionaba de tener un país donde los niños puedan estudiar, donde se pueda beber agua del río, donde se pueda vivir sin que lo que nos falte sea la violencia, y que nos sobre una convivencia en paz en una sociedad que pueda generar buenas cosas a partir de la generación de conocimiento. Entonces creo que ese es, digamos, ese llamado es fundamental, porque no es el primer intento que hace el país. En el año 90-94 el gobierno de César Gaviria se hizo la primera convocatoria de Misión de Sabios, y digamos la queja repetida de la comunidad fue muy bonito el documento, fue muy bonito las intenciones, pero no se materializó. Entonces, digamos, ese es el tema fundamental. La misión básicamente parte de decir, bueno, tenemos una gran diversidad cultural, pero también nuestro tema de diversidad por naturaleza. Entonces, ¿cómo hacemos que esa biodiversidad cultural y ambiental se convierta en la clave de tener una industria, un nuevo modelo productivo que sea capaz de integrar todas las posibilidades que ofrece la cuarta revolución industrial?
Here we have these three challenges. The architecture of the mission, well, we had eight.
Digamos, en la arquitectura de la misión se dice, bueno, se armaron 8 focos temáticos.
Thematic focuses. The interesting in Maria del Pilar could also mention these, how these groups worked on the knowledge themes around reflections, and how at the end they start working together and make big bets. And the biggest bet is like, well, two biggest bets are the emblematic missions. One guided towards the economy, the water and climatic change, the model of Colombia as sustainable model, one for equity and one educate with quality. These were the 5 missions. The fundamental here is to work emblematic missions and policy to strengthen the centers. with the proposal that you have here with the network, it's very similar. And in terms of economy, it's a little bit more the focus of today's view. How can this be a bet to have a new development model based on the sustainable development objectives, how these objectives help us to launch things, how to strategies of biomass evaluation, the production of renewable energies, how can we mitigate the climate change, and in terms of deforestation, how to use the potential of the Colombian biodiversity. I think that this is the biggest bet. And I'm going to go very quickly through this. It's just to mention that what I would like to highlight here, economy became the pilot. Basically, we did several consultancy studies for the green technology growth to make the whole action plan. Obviously, green growth and Sabios, basically technical studies supported by CIPAL. And we built, well, for the first time, I believe, we worked together with the ministries to have this type of bets. Because obviously what Misión de Sabio says is something fundamental. Science, technology, and innovation is fundamental, but we require the coordinated work of all the ministries, and this we have been able to advance here. And what do we want? Well, we want to bet on a Colombia that will be launched by the Society of Knowledge. So this is the bet. This is simply some of the data of why we need to work. And I think we're tired of saying so because this is the bioeconomy of the country. These are just numbers. I'm not going to mention them, but this is the frame of the topics in terms of biomass, the huge potential. The numbers are incredible. Sometimes we don't mention what we're talking about when we mention this amount of numbers. Obviously to say well, there are some segments that are common both in the definition given by the Green Growth Mission as the Misión de Sabios and that potential that can be given to preserve the biological resources based on knowledge. And obviously these starts a new economical sector. So these are the purposes of the ministries and of the companies, because we're making a new model that will create new industries. So obviously today, well, we need to modernize many of the sectors that are usually traditional at the time. So the objective of this mission was to potentialize that socio-economical development, which was fundamental. A fundamental topic is a regional topic from and towards the regions. And part of the final reflections when we look at compasses is that the regional portion is fundamental in politics and in policies. And we need to generate products with high aggregated value, which normally is what should be achieved with science, technology, and innovation. The mission identified 5 strategic areas. I would just like to talk about area 4, which is green, which it was biomass, 100% zero waste. That was our driver. And topics that are transversal, governance. Well, what we need to highlight here is that we're talking about a ministry that is pretty young. We had a free law trial that was denominated unconstitutional by the court. The constitution of the ministry is since last year, but we've advanced in different topics in creating that national scientific committee, because we understood, and basically this is also listening to the recommendations of Mission of Sages, which is try to look at the knowledge topics, but also institutionality. This is fundamental to develop the bodies that help the ministry to do their job, because obviously these cannot be done by them alone. Also, the entities that obligate the state to invest in science and technology. So we have our regulatory map that is more important now, and we're also working on regulatory frames. And one of the main recommendations done is to have a unique decree on the sector. And this is fundamental. The goals are ambitious. We have lots of discussions about the goals for 2030, but this is the horizons of policies of Mission of Sages. So we want to transcend to those type of things. Also, generation of employment is something important. This needs to be done in all the Colombian states for the development of bioproducts. And well, what is our bet? One, how to transform passive into actives. And here we talk about the generation of aggregated value of residual masses is fundamental. And we need to consider residual wastewaters, biogas from those type of things, and to have a better quality of water. Industrial transformation is also a very important topic. Obviously, circular economy, products that are friendlier with nature, as they use all the circular systems about these, and especially that we have advanced in biological materials to produce new type of products. Capturing CO2, that's an important topic. Biofactories to impulse the green chemistry at the countryside. Dr. Maria del Pilar is going to talk about this later. And obviously to generate development for the rural areas and catalyzing the development of new biological type catalyzers. And a brief reflection about the mission of a sustainable Colombia. And why I'm mentioning this, because biomass is a fundamental aspect. This was the third mission that has a more transversal character that touches different sectors. It touches, obviously, the CTI. Compass 6049 is our general policy frame. We also talk about climate change, the non-conventional energy sources, the inclusion of hydrogen, 4.0 industry, sustainability, health, green growth that I already mentioned, the strategy to implement ORs at the country, which is a fundamental base, and all topics of productivity, especially strengthening the economy. So this is a frame, a very interesting regulatory frame that includes all the actors within the system: academy, entrepreneurship, society, and universities. So we have 5 strategic areas. So we already had implementation through the 903. This model had a first phase with in 2 sectors, energy and health sectors. So I'm going to briefly mention energy. Energy, this is what the mission says. What is the mission basically? Well, the challenge is to have trajectories and capacities, and that the country must be able to have an industry that will support all the energetic transition within the country, and identifies 3 large strategic programs. One that supports the processes of transition in terms of instrumentation of intelligent networks and everything related with these type of things in terms of biorefineries, exportation, and the second and a third is to develop abilities or capacities to develop intelligent cities. Here the role of energy is really important, and basically to give to focus more on the focus 2, which would be more or greater interest here is the topic of biorefineries as energetic borders, as green technologies. And the purpose is that the country can be able to develop technologies at small scale that can use the great diversity of raw materials and that can have a closed market that would be very interesting. So how other actors are aligning? Well, the strategy of strengthening with important actors for like Ecopetrol, and this was one of the first entities that showed an interest in how to work along Mission of Sages. And well, it's $30 million, so it's a small investment, and they're invested in for the next 3 years in 3 axes in transferring technology transference developed by Ecopetrol. And since they are a company that is focused in a defined point, well, these type of technologies that are important for them will be fundamental to develop capacities with other actors that could also develop these technological solutions. But we're also looking to other topics. Bioproducts is something that they would like to explore. A second bet is energetic transition. This year, the call that we have here in terms of carbon capture, the possibility to generate green hydrogen through water hydrolysis. We're looking at biomass for possible competences to develop these type of capacities, and also to work on this call is looking for teams that are able to demonstrate that they can produce hydrogen with the plants they have, because it's really to make a prefactability analysis of how these alternatives could work. And finally, a reflection about the compass. And what's interesting about this is that they acknowledge that it is aligned with the mission of Sages. And obviously, these involves other factors, looking at the chain value. But if you look, I hope you cannot see it, but on the right, we have the focus of the mission of Sages and the management of ecosystems. So it's fundamental is that the system acknowledges that we have some possibilities, but we also have some limitations. Basically, what we need to do is try to use what we have and do it very well. I also forgot to mention, which is important for this reflection of the network, is that the mission of the focus of sustainable energy, its first objective is to create a center of energetic transition. So are they going to use previous centers or the infrastructure we already have? So this is related to capacities. And if you look at the whole amount of capacities of the country in terms of research. There are over 5,500 research groups, but the energy groups are not 100. So we're talking very small dynamic communities, but in order to advance and to consolidate the processes, we need to look for things that consolidate these capacities. Now, let's say that in that sense, that the kindness of these things, we need to work on the chain of knowledge, potentialize all the topics, and governance is fundamental. So everything we're doing is to strengthen all these, especially the topic of infrastructures, and a reflection about specifically the generation of knowledge topic. The call of the mission of SAGES is to strengthen the basic knowledge, and we heard yesterday that the focus of the University Nacional are not very different from the ones of the mission of SAGES, with two fundamental precisions. Well, they have cyber topic in convergent topics, but it's within the critical model. And something very interesting is agricultural sciences, which it comes here in more explicit manner. The thing is that agricultural topics in mission of SAGES, well, we know they are there, but they are not as strong. The second point is to develop a plan to manage of assets of the shared infrastructure, and this has generated many discussions because the country needs to optimize their research infrastructure. Instead of creating them everywhere, we need to generate mechanisms that will allow to work together, especially entrepreneurs and all companies to have access to these research infrastructures, to have a broader social mean, and to advance in these research institutions. So this is a fundamental call of mission of SAGES to strengthen these infrastructures. And at the end, a brief reflection about the partnerships. Yesterday was mentioned, and well, we have two partnerships. The biggest bets of energy research are here. The 2030 Alliance, and if you look at this exercise was before the mission of SAGES. But here it's towards sustainable energy. The drivers are the ones I mentioned, ODS7. So we're talking about diversification of the energetic, which is led by the university here in Medellin. Well, Farid is the director of the Project 4, which talks about polygeneration, and Seneca, which was financed 6 months later. Also, Biomass is here as projects that are in the Valle del Cauca for the densification of the residues created by the cane industry. Also, our refrigerators in Córdoba, also CO2 capturing, and it's also interesting to have an alternative that comes for hydrogen, especially in storage, which is pretty complicated. So I believe there is a big level of so we've given some steps forward. Sometimes we would like to go faster. These are the big challenges that a new ministry has in order to strengthen itself, And simply to finish, well, this is our big dream. A bet on a country so biodiversity that biomass through science and knowledge will become in a development leverage for the socio-economical development, considering all its needs. And this is what I wanted to highlight. Obviously, many of the questions of the communities, what was going to happen with these processes. So I think that we need to be optimistic, and the country has built enough, so it would be difficult for priority to change radically. Sometimes what could change are the emphasis on one point greater than the others, but you could think that life is already made, and that the challenge for all of you, it's around understanding the architecture of the system, how we can take advantage of all these. I think it's a great topic. It's a great to use all the synergies, that we're not alone, and that we have a great task ahead of us. So thank you very much for this space.
Of course, Professor. Do we have any questions for Yesir, who is representing the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Technology? Go ahead. I have a question regarding the governance structure of the energy sector in Colombia, and I want to ask, considering the context of the country before the elections. So what is the structure of this governance, very quickly? And I'm asking this question because I would like to know what's the role played by ProBure, and how do they include the biomass aspect. Does it make any sense of what it is expected from biomass in this energy transition? Well, the only thing I forgot to mention is that with this Ecopetrols initiative, for the first time, we were able to have an alliance. And they also include the Ministry of Mines and Energy. In a way, there is a link. And we also talk about energy transition. I didn't mention it, but Compass requires us to make certain commitments. Some people say that Compass is just a bit of bad news, but if you are told by Compass to do something, you have to budget all the resources, because that's what you need to do. So Compass has a very strong commitment with the ministry. They need to have a research agenda that should include all the priorities, and these priorities should be agreed with the Ministry of Mines. And it plays a very important role in the energy sector. So in that sense, there's coordination, there is articulation in the framework of fiscal investment. Ministries also are called to or required to take action, and they have certain commitments in terms of the investment in science and technology. But we don't rule out this kind of works that are being done. Hydrogen is in the first line for the first 3 years of work, but we need to work with them, these kind of topics, because those probably goals also require us to provide an input. And those calls need to answer or to respond to the priorities that are set in Compass. Anyone else who would like to ask a question? Yes, I wanted to capitalize on your talk. And I've been talking about this with Pilar and sometimes with Manuel. I think that vision that you just presented, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is a vision that is showing us that we're going towards a new company. I think existing companies have done their homework, but if we really want to transform Colombia, we need to think about a new company, a company that understands the research process, the development process, and in a way creates all these jobs, the information and the knowledge. I don't know if you are in agreement. I concur, and in terms of the energy sector, when we talked about energy transition 10 years ago, what we were seeing is that this means new companies, new business models, and this sector was very static. And in a way, we're seeing these results. We're seeing these changes. And perhaps by 2050, the energy sector will be completely different from what we have now. And those that are aware of this are starting to make the way of doing business. Because the one who doesn't make these changes will disappear. But there's also an opportunity to create new companies. And we were talking about the fourth industrial revolution, and perhaps Maria del Pilar, who attended the discussions, our discussions with Orlando Ayala when he was proposing the critical architecture system, it is because the role they can strengthen is very big. The type of companies in the future will be very different. I think these are some things that will happen in the future. This doesn't mean that traditional companies will disappear. They also have to make certain changes and adapt to the market needs. And I think they are not ignoring these kind of topics. But I think the big growth relies on those small companies, but not the micro enterprises that were mentioned yesterday. So maybe we can move towards the concept of SMEs. So a small company in Europe is like a mid-sized company here. That's what we are dreaming about. That's what we expect to see. Thank you so much, Jesir and the Ministry of Science for accepting the invitation to this meeting. I would like to welcome Dr. Manuel Garcia Perez. He has a talk about the future of new fuels. He is a professor of the Department of Biological Systems Engineering in Washington. He has a PhD of the Biological and Agricultural Engineering faculty from University of Georgia. Welcome, Professor Manuel. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you about the work that we've been conducting. It creates a vision on how we can move forward in terms of alternative fuels for the aviation industry. The work that we'll be presenting today was developed by some of my students, and it also has the contribution of certain professors and discussions with our friends from some North American labs. It is important to understand why, or what's the main driver de nuestra.
What is the main driver of our problems today? And the major driver is population growth. We're going to have in the next year, although we already have a peak in terms of the acceleration of the growth of population, population will continue growing till actually getting into close to 11 billion people at the end of the century. And again, that increase in population will mean that there will be more demand for energy, and also people will like to have higher quality of living. So we need to be thinking every time we talk about energy, about these perhaps 5 new billion people that at the end of the century will need more energy. Not only the ones that we have today, but also those that at the end of the century. And those people will be born mostly in Africa and in Latin America. We're not going to have population growth in North America. We're not going to have population growth in Europe. China is decelerating dramatically their growth, so most of these are people in Latin America and in Africa that we need to be thinking about them. And it's not only growth in population, it's are people that want to get out of poverty.
The population increase is a problem that we also have. Millions of people who want to get out of poverty, and that means that as they move forward, they use more, they consume more. So a person in Africa that wants to have a better quality of life, we cannot leave this behind. So these 5 billion people will require new energy, and therefore we need to think about how we're going to provide this energy. On the other hand, we have an oil industry that is in crisis, and we have to talk about this. The oil industry is in crisis. In the last 20 years, we haven't been able to increase the conventional crude oil production. It has been on heavy oils, which means more pollution and more costs. So there's no possibility for the oil industry to continue to improve and provide the oil that is required. So this is a reality. We cannot remove this. They cannot do anything else. They have reached the limit, and the only way to keep growing is through the fracking in the U.S. So it is more difficult, and oil becomes more difficult to extract every single day. So this is a crisis. We are not building any more oil refineries. So this is a crisis. We are facing a crisis. So how have we been able to make progress? Through fracking heavy oils, and this what, ¿cómo hemos podido crecer? Tenemos el fracking, tenemos también los
the path forward, these 5 new billion people that need energy, we don't know how we're going to provide that. And we need to be thinking on that. So those that believe that they want to eliminate the petroleum industry don't even think about that. Petroleum industry is already on their maximum. We need to be thinking in a new industry that will provide for those new people that need to grow. And again, all of that together with the fact that by using fossil fuels, we are increasing the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that is resulting in global warming. So we have clearly many, many problems that are coming together that need to be somehow solved, and the solution really requires, it's not anymore a blend. I think we need to be aware we're changing a paradigm. If the previous generation could think a technology that will solve everything, that's not possible today anymore. Today we need a blend of technologies that gradually will allow us to grow to this path to the end of the century, where hopefully we're going to stabilize in terms of population numbers. Now, not everything is bad. I will say that if the energy industry did very poorly, the agriculture industry did extremely well. Yo debo decir que si la industria energética no lo hizo nada bien, la industria de la agricultura fue extraordinaria. El incremento en productividad que se logró en la agricultura fue extraordinario. la producción de fertilizantes y la producción y el incremento de la cantidad de granos y productos agrícolas por hectárea es realmente todo un milagro. Sí, y esto que vemos aquí, desde el año 1940 hasta ahora, hemos casi que aumentado en 8 veces la productividad por hectárea. Y eso no hablamos porque generalmente nada más que hablamos de lo malo, pero realmente la agricultura ha sido la estrella en términos de cómo ha estado produciendo alimento para alimentar más personas, y todo eso gracias a los fertilizantes y por supuesto, a la selección de plantas que tengan mayor capacidad de producción. Debido a este incremento en la producción de granos, because of this increase in grain production, particularly in corn, we see that part of this excess in production of corn has gone to produce fuels, in this case, ethanol. Now, production of ethanol was again the result of a crisis in the petroleum industry. The petroleum industry could not continue producing or selling their fuel because they didn't have octane enhancers, and the only alternative was ethanol. La industria del etanol se produce o crece gracias a 2 factores fundamentales. Había maíz disponible y, por otro lado, la industria petrolera estaba en crisis. No tenía una manera de aumentar el octanaje de la gasolina, y la única forma era el etanol. Por lo tanto, tuvo que abrirse, decir, bueno, 10%, y estamos dispuestos a pagarlo a un precio más alto porque en definitiva no tenían ninguna opción. Ahora, es importante ver que una gran cantidad del maíz se utiliza para alimentación de animales, fundamentalmente el livestock, las vacas, los pollos, etc. Y hay que decir que si usted quiere saber el futuro, I will then go only in Spanish, okay? So the translator can.
Bueno, la voy a hacer solamente en español para que los traductores puedan hacer su trabajo. Okay, if you see what's happening in elementary schools in the U.S. and in several developing countries, they're saying that eating meat is bad, and if I eat meat, that's bad. So meat consumption in the next 15 years will start to reduce globally, and we'll see this kind of movement. So we'll continue to see an excess in the grain production that can be used to produce fuel. And we will have a reduction in the gasoline that is being used. Therefore, there is an excess in the ethanol production. We will have a lot of ethanol, and we won't know what to do with it. And that's also a very important trend, because in Iowa we have all these agricultural groups that produce corn. What happens with diesel fuels? It will continue to grow, and we have an issue with jet fuels. Even though the amount of jet fuel that is used is not very big, we have a difficulty. When you buy an airplane today, this plane will be used for the next 30 years. There's no possibility to replace the jet fleet because there's no technology to do so. Therefore, in the next 30, 40 years, we will continue to see that airplanes will be very similar to the one that we have today. They will continue to use the same type of fuel that we use today. Therefore, it's very important, especially for the aviation industry. The aviation industry is trying to find a way to keep their social contract. If I listen to my daughter, she wants to travel around the world, which means is that the aviation industry will continue to grow, and more citizens will use airplanes. Therefore, the aviation industry needs to have its social contract, and the only way to do so is by making sure that they reduce the environmental impact that they are causing. They are aware that if they do not reduce the environmental impact, the society will ask them to stop. It is very interesting because there are just a few suppliers, and 10 airports in the U.S. can consume 80% of the fuel, and therefore this is an industry that is increasing constantly. When we talk about biomass, And we tend to put biomass in the same package of wind and solar energy. Please don't do so, because biomass is the only source of green carbon. It is the only mechanism that was provided by the nature to take carbon from the atmosphere and transform it into a material that can be used again. This is very interesting, but it is not solving the problem that we have. We have a problem that is based on carbon emissions, and the only thing that can help us is biomass. We don't have another alternative other than biomass. So this group of people that need energy can have it, but we will continue to use petroleum and import in large amounts. And that means that we need to increase the CO2 amount that is being sent to the atmosphere. And the only way to reduce these quantities is biomass. And we see that the problem that we have here in terms of cost, biomass is 30 cents, 0.3 cents per megajoule. Fuel, jet fuel has a different cost. It's 1.4 cents per megajoule. Electricity is 1.9 cents per megajoule. So nature, in terms of biomolecules, these biomolecules are oxygenated. In this case, we have sucrose, starch, triglycerides, cellulose. And now I want to talk about oxygen, because the fact that jet fuel has oxygen is very important, because it creates a disadvantage. It creates disadvantages compared to other potential sources of jet fuel. So it's important to remember that we have these biomolecules, but if you see, we also have triglycerides. These are biological molecules that have the least amount of oxygen. Therefore, they have a competitive advantage in how to produce jet fuel. What is the problem to produce jet fuel? The final product is fixed. It cannot be changed, because we cannot change jet turbines and the systems that they are going to use. Therefore, when we think about producing jet fuel based on biomass, we need to think that we will have a mix of hydrocarbons in a defined proportion, because these engines were designed and they have to meet certain conditions. And when the fuel is used in a jet, this is not only to provide energy, but it is also used to provide other functions, such as cooling. Therefore, it also has certain characteristics in the number of carbons, between 12 and 16 atoms of carbon. Therefore, we are in a situation where we want to produce one type of product that we cannot modify based on biomass. Now, to this aim, in order to take jet fuel to the market, it has to be approved by STM, and there are certain stages that you need to follow. And in each of those stages, hundreds of thousands of tons are being used to make sure that there are not issues. We have 7 technologies that have been approved so far. And this includes a mix between traditional fuels and jet fuels. In this case, we have the hydrotreatment of fats. And this is very relevant for the industrial, for the Colombian industry, the palm oil industry in Colombia. We're also talking about alcohol to jet. It's very important if we want to convert the excess of ethanol that we have in the market into jet fuel. And we have a number of technologies that produce a product that is accepted. So it's not a matter of the product. Now, when we think about how to convert biomass into jet fuel, today we have 2 mechanisms. Initially, we break the micromolecule into smaller molecules, and later on we remove the oxygen. This is the mechanism that we have today to produce jet fuel. As we see here on this chart, we have technologies that will convert any biomass into jet fuel. We have platforms based on lipids, sugars, biocrude. We go to these intermediaries, and then we have a secondary conversion, and we move from
to combustion products. So if we have alternatives? So what we are going to discuss now, it's not economical situation, but we need to know how to produce it with a cost or a value that it's competitive. So we need to think about something. The issue here is not just an economical issue. We wouldn't be talking about this if we didn't have an environmental issue. So what we're saying here is that we have an economical issue that has a environmental background and has to be used within the analysis. So we're going to look at the economical issue of the production of airplane fuel. So what we used were 6 technologies. We did the economical analysis, and in the HIFA technologies and oil treatments, the production costs were in $3,500 and $1,500 dollars per metric tons. In case of fuels by cellulosic were between 5,000 tons. The cost in the market is $400 to $900 per ton. So the question is how to go from these high production costs to this price, which is today's market price. So today it is possible with the incentives we have in the market to go from $1,500 to $400,000 per ton, at least in the US, to produce airplane fuels. But it's not possible to break this difference with a product that we're producing at $2,000 or $5,000. Incentives are not as large as to break this difference. So we have to think, well, what is the issue? Why can't we do it? Why haven't been able to have technologies that are close to these production costs? And when we see that we do the plotting of the cost with we see that we can have an equation, that line that says that the price is the price of the raw material, the cost of conversion divided by the yield of product, how many kilograms of products I obtain by kilograms of biomass I'm using. So when I look at the value of the feed in biomass is $20 the ton. If it's clean, it could be $400 per ton. And in conversion, it's between, and the yield of product is the issue here. If you look at the product yield based on lipids, it's greater than 80%. If you look at the yield based on the cellulosic product, it's between 1 and 23%. And the question is, why do I have this big yield difference? Well, it's because you have to pay to eliminate this product, and the other case you have more costly but with no oxygen, and it's more costly to produce airplane fuels. So from here to 2030, the U.S. has a goal, and until 2030, all airplane fuels produced in the U.S. will come from oils, fats. It could be lipids, fat. And the challenge until 2030 is to increase the production of lipids. There is no technological issue to do so. We just need to connect them and produce more lipids. Between 2030 and 2050, in order to have the production level required in the U.S. to comply with the airplane industry, we have to develop from cellulosic lipids. And I'm going to talk about the real possibility we'll have to meet our goals. We need to understand that when in the schemes you have an intermediary and then you replace oxygen. And the price is very similar in the intermediate. Depolarization is not the issue. The great problem is how to eliminate the oxygen. And you can eliminate it in two ways, as CO2 or as water. In terms of product yield, it's more desirable to eliminate CO2, the oxygen of biomass, as water. Why? Because carbon weighs a lot and what you're selling is carbon. So how much of product should I produce to have the market price that we have today? Well, in this case, if we look at the lower equation, $65 a ton, $600, the cost of conversion divided by the market price, which is $600 per ton, we need technologies that will go to 61% of conversion with no type of incentives, with no types of market incentives. If the technology has to compete with oil today, it should be able to go to 61% of production cost. Again, it's not necessary because since we have a number of incentives, we can compete with 30, 40% of production cost. But in the economical point of view, we need to be at 60 something. So the question is it possible? This is a very simple analysis where we have an agnostic technology here. We have the biomass. We eliminate the oxygen as water. We introduce all the hydrogen we need. And here we have the composition of biomass. Here we have the elemental analysis of the fuel we want to produce. And yes, we're going to produce compounds with paraffins, aromatic compounds, so we can produce up to 54%, and if we're going to produce aliphatics, all up to 60%. So we're close. But we would need to produce all the carbon of the biomass should go to the fuel. So it's very hard for technology, but nevertheless, since we have the potential advantages of the production of the incentives, we could get there. Now, let's talk. Up until now, I talked about the economical point of view, just economical point of view. But the production of alternative airplane fuel, it's not only based on the economical basis. We need to consider the limitations of the environmental constrictions, the logistics constrictions, and the thermodynamic constrictions. So we're developing an industry that it's not just going to live out of its economical benefit. It needs to receive, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this. It needs to receive some incentives for social services, environmental services that the industry could provide. So trying to refine the equation that we have here, we try to have an agnostic model, a technology model. So we have the biomass, the hydrogen power, and we have fuel. So we have other costs, and we adjust the data of the literature. Well, a techno-economical analysis could take a year, and at the end is why do we work so hard? Well, we used 50 data points from these studies, and we tried to adjust the data to this simple equation. And at the end, what we got is this equation that says the production cost of the fuel is biomass. This is the conversion cost, $300 per ton. And it's very similar to the whole chemical industry. All chemical industry of conversion point is between $200 and $400 per ton. So there's nothing weird or rare here. What we saw here is the cost of natural gas, of the production of oxygen that we can produce. What we say is that we have a problem to adjust the cost of, in the technologies that use electrolysis, we have a problem to adjust the cost of the technology. So we need to introduce a new factor, which is the cost of electrolysis. And here's the cost of the power of the electricity we use during the process. So with this general equation, we will be able to play a little and see what's possible to do in the field, what type of technology can be used. So it's important to recall that this type of analysis should be done with the economical incentives, because technology can be very good or very economically, but very poor in terms of environment. So this is, so biomass is good in economical, but poor in economical. And so we have to compromise and see which is the solution, because plastics would be very good as fuels, but very economically, but poorly for the environment. So we have these identification numbers and these renewable identification numbers that are related with the intensity of production of carbon in the fuel. So we use these simple models, and this is the state where we have the technology, like carbon is not even completely used. This is a more advanced concept where oxygen will go as CO2, and we consider that the carbon will be fuel, and the yield goes up to 34%. The production cost is here, and this type of technology we can have that has a low carbon intensity, and we'll have $600 per ton, and we'll have
Lo que significa que si somos capaces de convertir todo el carbono que tenemos en la biomasa, incluso que se pone en forma de CO2, estaremos cercanos. El problema de este concepto es que aquí no le introduce.
the issue is that here we don't have oxygen, and you require lots of technologies. So every time we introduce oxygen to the technology, you're going to pay for this eventually, because that is oxygen you need to remove, and this has a production cost. So when I start to introduce oxygen to gasify or any technology, these prices will go up. And the other option is to remove the oxygen as water. And it will bring hydrogen, so the yield goes to up to 55%. So we're close to where we want to be. The production cost is 600 grams per ton. The carbon index didn't go up because we're using natural gas to produce hydrogen. Here we have a reduction, but we have a production cost of $379 per ton, very close to the market production cost, so below the $480. So this type of technology, it has a future, and what we did here is we tried to make carbon into fuel, and we increased the yield because we increased 1 carbon of natural gas, so the production cost was very low. And this type of concept could be viable even without incentives. And the carbon intensity increased. We don't have any ring. So it's interesting to see how this technology compensates. So it improves the economical portion, and we have the same final result. So in this case, we eliminate the oxygen as O2. We try to eliminate the oxygen through electrolysis, and the cost of electricity. The electricity is very expensive. So even though we have here the production cost is high, and the ring is important, but we don't go to where we want to achieve. So electrolysis seemed interesting to remove oxygen, but the cost won't justify the environmental advantages it would provide. In the final case, what happens if I help a little with methane? Here I can increase the production yield, and still I'm a little bit higher. So here there's a concept where I take advantage of a product without oxygen, like natural gas, but my technology will remove the carbon from the system. And this is very interesting because it will allow me to use the competitive advantage of biomass with green carbon, and at the same time compensate the economical issue, because yield is going to be low due to the oxygen and this type of technology. Here we have a production yield. Production cost is low. We have, this is very interesting, and we're almost at the same final point. What does this mean? It means that in the development of this technology, it is important, the regulatory frame is very important, the environment we have, because depending on this regulatory frame, we can have technologies that will help us, that will give, depending on the country where we are, the technology could be technology that takes advantages from the economical, not biomass, but using natural gas, or like in the US, since we have so many incentives to, then biomass becomes more competitive. So we cannot talk about technology unique for the whole world. It depends of the regulations and the incentives. And the US, well, you have to be very careful because we cannot trust the regulatory field because these can change. So we need to have a technology that can survive. We know that it is important to survive the first 5 years. If we have a positive regulatory environment for 5 years, since I got certain amount of revenue, then technology can continue surviving. But it will depend of the environmental incentives. But then there will be a time where these incentives disappear. So here that we observe here is a biorefinery. What we will be thinking is oil refineries that will be adapted to use biomass, natural gas, and to end up as fuels. So we're thinking the future of biorefineries are refineries that will be fed with different feedstock, and biomass is our queen, and it's important. This element that allows us to remove green carbon and accumulate it, and that's why we have so much biocarbon. It is very important because it's a way to stabilize the biomass carbon and to compensate the environmental weaknesses that could be found. So I'm going to talk for 5 minutes for a project we are starting at the Washington State. It's called the Ascent Study, and it's done by a research center associated to the government, and we need to make sure that aviation could have a sustainability center to continue operating and to improve the environmental aspects. The mission of a center is to focus on improving the combustion of airplanes, to explore sustainable aviation fuels, and we won't be able to compensate these otherwise if we don't bring fuels with low carbon intensity indexes, and also working on to improve solutions such as the noise created by aircrafts. So we're all working in ASCENT 1, looking at the potential of the US to produce aviation fuel. So we're developing methodologies for the analysis of where the biorefineries will be placed to make the supply chain. So we've developed many tools for the design of a regional bioeconomy. So our proposal of Accent 93 is to use the tools developed for the US with our international partners in Latin America, Asia, and Africa to look at the capacity we will have worldwide to produce aviation fuel, and working with Latin America. And the first year we're going to begin with Colombia due to the friendship we have with Colombia, and also we're going to work with Ecuador and the Dominican Republic. And what we want is to bring the tools we develop in the US, place them and bring the students from Colombia to the US, and also to work with Colombians here to use the tools and design and look at the possibility to develop aviation fuel alternative production. And the tools are going to be used in this industry, but can also be expanded to other types of industries. The objective is to see how we intervene the region and create an impact. So the project should begin in September. So we are already planning our first meetings with the ministry, with the government, through the Embassy of Colombia in the US, and we're going to work with our partners, Abisure partners, and also we're going to work after these with other countries, Brazil, Chile, well, all LATAM. That means we're going to create the institute in the Washington State University that would be agriculture, energy, and environmental systems energy, to use these tools to see what will happen in areas where we have interventions. And obviously, we're going to work with the Colombian colleagues during the next 4 or 5 years. So with these, I would like to finish and thank you all for your kind attention. If you have any questions,